From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Sitting in tonight, Forrest Sawyer.
Good evening. There is an indication tonight that the threat of bombing by the U.S. and its allies has broken a dangerous stalemate in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Serbian forces have begun evacuating a strategic hilltop overlooking Sarajevo. That would open the way for a return to peace talks. It is a good sign. But the Serbs have pledged to withdraw before, and as Hillary Brown reports, there is a good chance this will be yet another broken promise.
The Serb troops seemed in a victorious mood as they marched to the transports that would take them further down the mountain. NATO warplanes roared overhead. These men were part of the brigade that captured Mount Igman almost 2 weeks ago. They carried signs of the villages they'd conquered in a campaign that has stalled the Geneva peace talks. In a tentative agreement, they are withdrawing to new ceasefire lines negotiated on the mountain today by the UN Chief of Staff here.
I'm very hopeful that what we have achieved here today, and with the quite clear and obvious withdrawal of the Serbian forces, that the peace talks at Geneva will be able to start again.
There were signs, however, that once again the Serbs do not intend to withdraw completely. While some tanks moved down the mountain, others were simply hidden among the trees. And some soldiers admitted that they are being replaced by an elite commando unit known as the Panthers.
I think the Panthers will do their job for us.
Before the Serb troops left the mountain, they set fire to a hotel and some chalets. But in a late-night press conference in Sarajevo, Brigadier Hayes said that if either side crosses the new ceasefire line, the UN is authorized to open fire.
Any vehicle comes into the area after 4 o'clock tomorrow, you, UNPROFOR, have my total authority to shoot at them.
This is now the second Serb withdrawal from Mount Igman in as many days, in a cat-and-mouse game that once again has forestalled the threat of Allied airstrikes. It may also lead to the resumption of the Geneva peace talks and the kind of ethnic partition plan for Bosnia that the Serbs want. Hillary Brown, ABC News, Bosnia.
At Sarajevo's main hospital today, a debate over what is more precious, the life of a child or the life of an adult. A British doctor and nurse had gone to this pediatrics ward to prepare for the evacuation of several dozen severely wounded children. It turns out all but a few of those on the United Nations evacuation list are actually adults. British officials are furious. They say that children should be a higher priority. A UN spokeswoman's response: we cannot make Sarajevo into a supermarket where foreign officials come to pick and choose whom they would like to save. While most of the world's focus has been on Sarajevo, the conditions in other parts of Bosnia are just as desperate. Colin Baker of Britain's independent television News was in central Bosnia when Muslim forces launched their latest attack against a Croatian village. One caution: the pictures you're about to see are hard to watch.
It's doubtful he's ever heard of Geneva. He's a frightened, injured little boy, and tonight he may die. He's 2 years old. In the next bed, his 4-year-old sister, her left leg amputated this afternoon. Alongside them, their mother and 3-year-old sister, all wounded when a mortar struck near their home at lunchtime. The friend they were playing with lost an arm. Here, they've become used, but not immune, to cries of pain and grief. But this is not a real hospital, it's a church, though it is now the only makeshift medical center with facilities to treat war wounds for 80,000 Croats in central Bosnia. There is a hospital 15 miles away, but that's across the front line and it's controlled by Muslims. Here, the Croat towns and villages are surrounded. War wound or terminal illness is no guarantee of a flight to safety. These 2 village ladies are seeking evacuation. One has breast cancer diagnosed over 6 months ago, and the other has cancer of the stomach. Doctors asked the UN to evacuate them 2 months ago, but the UN hasn't responded. At the church hospital, there's no envy or bitterness that Western concern seems focused on Sarajevo's Muslims. There's just a failure to comprehend why these lives appear deemed less important.
That was Colin Baker of Britain's independent television News. In a moment, Michael Jordan's father has been found, apparently a murder victim. On the American agenda, Roman Catholic priests, male and celibate. Is it time for a change? And our person of the week in command. A shock today for basketball superstar Michael Jordan. A body found 10 days ago in Bennettsville, South Carolina, was positively identified today as his father, James Jordan. The FBI says it's investigating the possibility that Jordan was kidnapped. Armin Katayan has details.
Authorities said Michael Jordan's father had been murdered, but that's all they knew.
The only thing we know is that the cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the chest.
On August 3rd, a body was found floating in this creek, bordering North and South Carolina, about 60 miles from the elder Jordan's home in North Carolina. 2 days later, this luxury car was found stripped and abandoned in a wooded area miles from the body. But the car was missing its license plates and showed no signs of struggle. So it wasn't until 10 days later that local police matched the man in the river to the 57-year-old father of Michael Jordan. Around the NBA, James Jordan relished his stand-in role for a superstar son, a son he adored.
I couldn't begin to fit a word to tell you how proud I am.
They even teamed up for a touching TV commercial.
Are these your eggs?
Mm-hmm. Mr. Jordan loved being Michael Jordan's dad, and I think Michael loved being Mr. Jordan's son.
In Chicago, the father's death stunned the world champion Bulls and their fans.
This is just sad, especially for Chicago. He's just a great individual. Everyone just cared for him so much. He was like part of he's just one of the guys. I mean, we would see him all the time.
A retired General Electric worker, James Jordan seemed a solid, soothing influence on his son.
I feel that my parents really steered me in the right direction.
And recently, when his son was dogged by questions about his high-stakes gambling, James Jordan defended him.
What he did, you know, in private was not anything to be ashamed about.
As for Michael Jordan, he arrived back home today in North Carolina, back to face the most painful moments of an already troubled year. Armin Katayan, ABC News, New York.
One other note, the coroner's office says the body of James Jordan actually was cremated a week ago. The identification was only made today by matching dental records. The coroner says he decided to cremate the body because there were no missing person reports at the time. The body was in bad condition, and the county has no facilities for burying the poor or homeless. President Clinton repeated a promise today, visiting a part of California which will be hit hard by military base closings. The president again pledged that the government would help workers who lose their jobs in the process. The president said the base closings, quote, can be used to make more economic opportunity than is lost. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained just half a point to close at 35.69. Trading was active. For the week, the industrial average picked up more than 9 points. When we come back, the Pope's message to the young. For Pope John Paul, today was a relatively quiet day in Denver, or at least as quiet as possible when tens of thousands of pilgrims want to see you. John Paul spent most of the day hiking and resting in the Rockies. But first, there were those pilgrims, the American bishops for that matter. Here's ABC's Bill Redeker.
On his way to celebrate Mass with the bishops, the Pope paused to bless those he really came here to see, the young.
He turned around and he looked right at us and he just went... That
was it. Inside Denver's Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, more than 450 bishops and cardinals were told they must do more to attract and keep young people in the church. John Paul's homily or sermon stressed the need to unify the Catholic Church worldwide. In other words, American Catholics should get in line and follow the conservative doctrine set down by the Vatican.
He was encouraging people to toe the mark. I think it was a reminder of the faith we have together, the obligations we have together, especially to young people.
Following the Mass, John Paul went out of his way to greet each bishop individually. The message was clear. If the Pope can spend that much time with so many different people, the bishop should do the same with the young.
Here's a man who's made time for us, and I guess I ask myself, am I willing to take that step and make this type of time, give this kind of time to people?
It worked. As John Paul departed for the mountains and some time off, bishops pulled together young people and began spreading the word. That word is that church leaders will spend more time with young Catholics, more time convincing them that they must follow the strict social and sexual rules set down by the Pope. Bill Redeker, ABC News, Denver.
During his visit to Denver, virtually every step taken by Pope John Paul has been seen and reported by an army of journalists. It's the kind of coverage that makes ABC's Jeff Greenfield wonder why religion is so often the untold story in the American media.
The Pope's visit is a big story, and more than 3,500 journalists are in Denver to cover it. But when it comes to the day-to-day presence of religion in America's media, it's a very different story. In fact, usually it's no story at all. Religion does make news when dozens of cult members die violently. Religion makes news when there's protest, or conflict, or dissent.
Gender justice.
And it certainly makes news when there's scandal.
I have sinned against you.
But the strong religious presence in America, where nearly 60% say they consider religion very important in their lives, is a story that's often hard to find. Only 50 newspapers in America even have a full-time religion reporter. The major TV networks have none.
If a visitor from another planet judged the extent of religious belief and the intensity of it and the meaning of it from what that visitor saw in our media, the impression would be totally mistaken in relationship to the reality.
We were having a nice brunch.
That's true not just in news, but in entertainment as well. TV families are almost never seen in church or synagogue. The short-lived sitcom Amen was a rare and unsuccessful exception. And movies, which once treated religion as literally sacrosanct, now either ignore the subject or portray it as the territory of hucksters and frauds.
I feel a healing coming on!
Why is religion so rarely seen in the media? For one thing, both news and drama rely on conflict, action. The quiet daily influence of faith is very hard to cover. Then there's the nature of media people. More skeptical, more secular.
I think what religion has represented to them is something that's confining and oppressive and old-fashioned and bourgeois, and what they're interested in is the social frontiers, and so they're not interested.
Add to this the sheer complexity of covering religion in a country with dozens of different faiths and denominations, each with its own theology, in a country where religious discussion itself is often a very touchy issue.
So the result is either no portrayal or one that is simply bland and meaningless.
So while big events like the Pope's visit attract crowds of journalists, the ongoing influence of religion in daily life goes all but ignored. This in a country where on any given weekend there are more people in houses of worship than attend Major League Baseball games all year long. Jeff Greenfield, ABC News, New York.
When we come back, the American agenda, women and the priesthood. On the American agenda, in light of the Pope's visit, we're going to continue our focus on the Roman Catholic Church. Tonight, the role of women. In an ABC News Washington Post poll, we asked whether the church should allow women to become priests. 63% of Catholics said yes. As for whether priests should be allowed to marry, again, a majority said yes. Two developments which the Vatican is determined to prevent. Our agenda reporter is Cokie Roberts.
Here's something you don't expect to see in a Catholic church: a woman in charge. But in Seattle, the shortage of priests is so severe that the bishop gave Patricia Repikoff the job of ministering to the parish of St. Therese.
As we begin our prayer today, we can just take a moment to collect ourselves on this.
At first, the congregation was skeptical.
What does it mean to have a woman pastor? And I think there's many things that were found out that it doesn't change much.
With thankful praise.
One thing that does not change: a priest, a man, must still come around to say Mass. And the parishioners are beginning to think that's a little silly.
I think women should be ordained. I think with the woman that we have on our altar here, we can certainly see that she is a priest.
So I think the Pope needs to set that prejudice aside that's been institutionalized and allow women to come forward and to want women to come forward.
But defenders of the male-only priesthood claim that modern ideas of sexual equality are irrelevant.
This is a matter of church teaching, in that the male is the only one who can represent Christ in the offering of his continued sacrifice, which is what the Mass is.
Not just males, celibate males, though there's a strong voice in this country calling on the Vatican to let priests marry.
Encouraging one another in moments of doubt and despair.
Father Anthony Breen officiates at a Seattle wedding, but Breen doesn't alleviate the priest shortage. This is not a ceremony sanctioned by the Catholic Church because Breen is married.
Marriage has added a dimension to my life and to my spirituality that I never thought could exist as a celibate.
Married men across the country are going about their priestly business, but not in Catholic churches.
The body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Father Anthony Massimini sets up his altar for masses in his own home in Paradise, Pennsylvania.
I do them now because I'm still a priest. I can't stop being a priest.
But you can stop joining the priesthood. Over the last 20 years, the number of men entering seminaries has dropped by about 8% a year. Over the same period, the number of American Catholics grew by 22%. Average age of today's priest, 56.
We've reported, and we've even referred to what's going on in the Catholic Church today as the collapse of the clerical order. It is a very, very serious crisis.
But church leaders say the challenge is not to change the system, but to a harder sell. Recruiting of students in Catholic high schools, promoting the value of celibacy.
Bless the food you're about to receive in your bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen.
That seems to be working at this Connecticut seminary, where 47 students enrolled this year, up from only 6 4 years ago.
Living the celibate life is key. It is the essence. It is the core of what it means to be Catholic and what it means to be, a Catholic priest.
Aside from the shortage of priests, more and more American Catholics question whether an all-male, unmarried priesthood is right. They want priests with experiences like their own, as well as wanting more priests, period.
Thank you.
This is Cokie Roberts for the American Agenda.
We'll be back in just a moment.
World News Tonight with Peter Jennings and the Person of the Week.
Finally tonight, our Person of the Week. Whenever anyone steps into an important and influential position, it is a time for reflection. That's even more true when the position is quite literally in the eye of the storm. With the U.S. facing changing times at home and abroad, there is a great need for leaders. Tonight, our Person of the Week, a man who has been training as a leader for most of his life.
I look forward with great enthusiasm, Mr. President, to helping you keep America's armed forces the very best that we have ever had. And soldiers, sailors, airmen that have no match.
Soldiers and sailors and airmen who would follow John Salikasvili into battle anytime, anywhere. General Salikasvili, Shally his friends call him, is the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe for now. This week, Bill Clinton named him to replace Colin Powell as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, America's highest military officer.
It's extraordinarily gratifying to me to be given this opportunity in a small way to repay my country through service in such a position of such high responsibility.
President Clinton explained the general's humility.
There is much more to his life than most Americans now know. It is a great American story. It began, as so many American stories do, in another land.
John Salikasvili was born in Poland shortly before it was overrun by the German army. His father was a Russian army officer. His family fled after the war and came to America. They settled in Illinois, where, after college, Salikasvili was drafted into the army. He worked his way up through the ranks.
So he's worked his way right up through the whole chain of command, and that needed a really special character all of its own.
After the Gulf War in 1991, General Salikasvili was put in charge of protecting the Kurds, who were isolated in northern Iraq and a target of Saddam Hussein. He was successful, and his compassion for Kurdish refugees won him the world's admiration. His career has moved full speed ahead. As the president's chief military advisor, there will be immediate decisions to be made, decisions that will affect the lives of his men and women in the armed services. General Salikasvili takes over at a critical time when the U.S. is once again faced with the possibility of military action to break the Serb stranglehold on Sarajevo. He says he will recommend the use of force against the Serbs only as a last resort.
I hope that we do not have to bomb as long as General Colin Powell is there, and I hope we do not have to do so when I am asked to assume that position. But no one should make a mistake. I think the resolve is there to do so, should those who are carrying on that struggle not modify their behavior.
This week, Salikasvili further demonstrated his skills as a diplomat when he took questions from one of the more aggressive armies in the world, the Washington Press Corps.
Will you seek to bring Ukraine and Russia and other East European countries into NATO, sir?
I have just been nominated for the position of chairman, not president of the United States.
John Salikasvili is about to assume enormous responsibility, and he says he's enormously grateful.
And so, Mr. President, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to continue in the service of my country. Thank you.
And so we choose Army General John Salikasvili, whose high school aptitude tests indicated he should become an engineer. His heart, he says, did not say the same thing. Now it is U.S. military policy he will help build. That's our report on World News Tonight. Don't forget 2020 later. I'm for